Hi. Can you talk through ISIL in Iran and how you look at making us safer?
I call them ISIS because they say the Levant, and it's not the Levant. Israel is real. It exists. It's a real country. So I call it ISIS, the Islamic State in Syria. Actually, they really hate us when you call them Daesh, which is the name they view as a slur, so we'll use that word today. Daesh, I guess. They say it's a slur. They get really upset. They threaten to cut the tongue out of anyone who uses that word. So Daesh, 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 Daesh. Now, if anything happens to me, you know who did it. So what are they? They are an apocalyptic, radical Sunni movement. And I mean, they broke away from Al-Qaeda for two reasons. Number one, because Al-Qaeda doesn't believe in a global caliphate. And number two, because they are 12ers. Basically, they believe that there's going to be this Armageddon showdown against the West. They believe it's going to happen in the city of Dominick in Syria. I have to be careful because I was in Dubuque, Iowa the other day, and the people said, here? It's going to happen here? I said, no, in Dominick, Syria. There's going to be their interpretation of Islamic prophecy is that there's going to be this final showdown between the West, what they call the armies of Rome, and them, and that they're going to win. The 12th Imam is going to emerge from hiding and is going to govern the world under this new caliphate. That's their belief. It's important to understand what they believe, not because it's true, but because that's how they recruit fighters. When they recruit you to join their cause, they recruit you with the promise that you're joining this apocalyptic movement that's going to basically govern a new era in human events, and you're going to everyone's either going to convert to Islam of their version or die. They control Sunni territory. What they've been able to exploit is Assad's brutal treatment of Sunnis, where he basically has barrel bombed and gassed Sunnis, killing over 250,000 of them, forcing hundreds of thousands to flee as refugees. And they've exploited that Sunni resentment against the Shia, or the Alawis, and they've exploited that to create the center of power that they now have in Iraq and in Syria. It has now grown beyond Iraq and Syria. They are now in Libya. They are a significant presence in Libya. They are growing a significant presence in Afghanistan, where they are nudging out the Taliban. They are starting to pop up in Yemen. We believe they're engaged in potentially the refugee camps in Jordan to carry out attacks in Jordan, and we know what they're trying to do around the world. How do they need to be confronted? Well, they need to be primarily defeated. They have to be defeated on the ground. You cannot defeat them simply with airstrikes. I know there are people out there saying, we're going to make the sands glow in the dark, we're going to bomb them 100. First of all, if you're cutting the military, you don't have the planes to make the sands glow to begin with. And second of all, you can't just defeat them from the air. You have to defeat them with a ground force. That ground force needs to be made up primarily of Sunni Arabs themselves. Why? Because the villages and the cities that they occupy are Sunni areas. If you send Kurds in to liberate those cities, they may win it militarily, but then the local population is going to rebel against them because they don't want Kurds governing them. If you send Americans to liberate those cities, we'll win militarily, but you're going to have a new insurgency because they're going to rebel against us. It has to be Sunni Arabs themselves who liberate us. So we need a ground force made up primarily of Sunni Arabs from Iraq and Syria, and also from Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and all these other countries in the region that are impacted by it. But they're going to need our help. They're going to need to have American special operators embedded alongside them to call in the airstrikes, to conduct special missions against their leadership, to help share intelligence and logistical support. We're going to have to increase our air support to the cause, especially once we have forward operators on the ground that can put eyes on the target and call in those strikes. But it is critical for this effort to succeed for a Sunni force to reject them ideologically and defeat them militarily. One more thing we have to do to defeat ISIS is we must beat them in the information war. The information and propaganda they put out now, the messages they put out is that life in ISIS territory is glorious, that you're going to be joining this wonderful army. They put out these glossy pictures of foreign soldiers or foreign fighters that have joined them and how happy they are. We need to start counter-messaging them. Number one, if you are not an Iraqi and you join ISIS, they treat you like garbage. That's the truth. If you are an American that joins ISIS, they treat you as cannon fodder. You are the first body they throw out there to get shot at. Number two, life in ISIS-controlled territory is a misery. There's no garbage service. Okay? There's no restaurants. There's no cafes. There's no life. It's terrible. So we need every armed conflict we've ever been involved in has had a propaganda informational aspect to it. We need to do a better job of counter-messaging them. And number three is we need to subject them to high-profile, humiliating defeats and publicize them. So anyone who's thinking about joining ISIS, instead of seeing them as an invincible force, sees them as a mediocre fighting force that once confronted by a significant counterforce folds like a cheap suit and a cheap tent and goes away. But this is a concerted effort. It will take American leadership to put it together. This president can't do it. You know why? Because the Sunnis resent him. And do you know why the Sunnis resent this president? Because he cut a deal with their mortal enemy, the Shia, in Iran, where he's going to deliver $150 billion of sanctions relief to the Shia in Iran. And he now has said to them, Iran, you are a mortal enemy of America, but you are now formally and legally allowed to enrich uranium. Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and every other American ally that's been with us for 30 years, you're not allowed to do that. So they're resentful and they're angry, and they won't cooperate with this president because they don't trust him. They find him unreliable and weak and feckless, and that's why American leadership, no matter what he says, is so severely lacking. And that's why you have to laugh and cry when you hear Hillary Clinton in the debate stage say, we finally have a strategy in place. Well, I don't know what universe she's living in, but we don't have a strategy in place that works. Even now, we do not.